Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the stage our panelists discussing technology and innovation, what to watch in the coming year.
Hello, everybody. I guess I'm live. There we are. Yeah, we're not as cool as like the group yesterday. We didn't get drinks or anything, but this being California, I did pass by the cannabis store on the way here and picked up a little something for everybody. It's called Conversation Starter.
Unreal.
So enjoy. And I've got some extras later for one's called Giggles. You'll love it. So, got a fine group here. We had a lovely lady that was going to join us, Kate Hamilton, but she couldn't make it. So unfortunately, it's just a bunch of guys talking to you today. But we'll do our best without the assistance of a lady. In this case, yes, we can do it. Trust me. So I'm going to let these gentlemen introduce themselves. I'll just kind of start by Jake, Emporia co-founder and CTO. So he's a true techie. Luckily, we have a few of those here. Could you maybe introduce yourself and then we'll go on?
Yeah, absolutely. Nice to meet everyone who I haven't met before. I'm Jake Roeland, the co-founder and CTO of Emporia Research. We're a self-serve platform for sourcing B2B sample programmatically. Key differentiator is we do that actually without a panel, which we might get into a little bit today. I do not come from a research background like potentially many of you. Like Frank mentioned, my background is more in technology and product and financial services. I started my career at Goldman Sachs on a trading desk, was there for about 4 years, and then went over and was a tech team lead at Amazon. Max.
Much simpler. I'm Max Nanis. I'm the founder and CEO of General Research. We are a yield management brokerage firm so that any supplier, any marketplace can have, state-of-the-art yield management strategies.
It's on me. So hi, everyone. My name is Klaus. I'm in research by accident for over 20 years, as I guess many of you are. I started founding my own businesses in Europe more than 20 years ago. And by now we run several brands. So we have some full-service research agencies that are based in Germany, in Austria. With Talk, we run 25 European online panels, where we also have long-term experience in collecting behavioral data, such as passive metering, audio listening, tagging, or geolocation data. And we also have a technology business because I'm by education a technician. And with this technology business, we have developed some products in the field of advertising technology. So we have some tools for measuring and tracking ad campaigns, for audience measurement of websites and apps. And we also have developed our own panel management system, which we are licensing. And because we're based in Europe, and there is GDPR, and like some of our clients are some governmental organizations, like privacy is a big issue, and we have built in a lot of privacy rules in our system.
Thank you. Emmanuel Probst. I'm global lead for brand thought leadership with Ipsos. And in that capacity, I counsel our client partners on brand measurement, brand performance, and activation. I'm also an adjunct at UCLA, where I teach market research, big surprise. And I also write my latest book, Assemblage, The Art and Science of Brand Transformation, is out now.
Yeah, great book, by the way. I recommend it highly. Understanding how brands are evolving is pretty important in our business, obviously, because that's much of what we do. Well, thank you all. As you can see, a great group. So back in my day, a bit of a cliche, but back in my day, I can say that, I'm old enough. We used to talk about things like, color TV or game changers, internet, computers. social media, whatever it might be. And today, so we're going to start off with a discussion really talking about artificial intelligence a little bit, since this is technology, and that's, I guarantee you, I'll bet anybody in this room $1 million that it'll come out of your mouth in 20 years from now, you'll be saying, back in the day, we didn't have artificial intelligence. We had to do things the old-fashioned way. We had to think, we had to analyze, we had to whatever. And so it's that big a change. And it's not just because ChatGPT came along a couple months ago and became the fastest app ever adopted in the history of apps, but it's just the whole spectrum of ways that it can influence our industry and our lives. And so I'd like to start, with the panel asking some questions about that. If they have some perspectives about how artificial intelligence in general, or perhaps NLP and other machine learning and other aspects of it, are likely to impact either our lives or our industry. Somebody want to volunteer to start?
Yeah, I could maybe start with just a general note. I think there definitely will become an expectation from consumers and users that just generally the products and services that we interact with will become more intelligent, right? Recommendations will become exceptionally stronger. Thinking about relating this back to our industry, filling out project descriptions, you might write a sentence and it actually fills out a whole project description for you that's pretty complete and useful. What I'm personally most excited about, especially as a sample provider related to OpenAI, is some of the search embedding feature sets. I think as that impacts targeting, probably a lot of folks in this room query their panel or their data set using traditional data sort of access methods or potentially keyword matching. And keyword matching is really great. If let's say you're searching for the word recession, it'd be really great at matching on the word recess or recessionist. But what it's not great at is matching on the word depression. And fundamentally, those words mean the same thing. And I'm pretty excited about how intelligent search can help us essentially better utilize our panels. And you can imagine as that relates to job titles, I could search for software engineer and potentially search against 45, 50 different titles that I might keep in my panel database or just in my database of where I'm recruiting from. So that's what I'm most excited about.
Okay.
So
Thanks, yeah.
I think it's very important to note, technology is neither good nor bad, right? It's entirely up to the application. And we're in the stage where all this technology is very new with text generators, ChatGPT, things like that. And maybe I'm a pessimist, but I think I'm a realist. And anybody in this space that thinks ChatGPT or text processors or text and any form of NLP technology is going to help you are delusional. What will happen is, right now we can identify Indian spammers because they use British English. It's pretty simple to be able to do that. It becomes more complicated as English proficiency increases. However, what will happen is the first application of all of these NLP processing tools is free text entry is going to be a 100% conversion. You won't be able to identify it. And that will be so much money for all these people in Bangladesh, Brazil, wherever. And what's going to happen is all these security companies are going to pop up and it's going to say, all right, we have this machine-generated text. We're now going to use a machine to try to identify this machine-generated text, and then it's going to go in the circle. And so the whole concept of being able to use open free text entry as some form of a security validation tool is going to dissipate over the next 5 years, right? It's going to be this cyclical problem that is just going to waste everyone's time.
Well, that is a pessimistic viewpoint on it, but a valid one.
I think it's very reasonable.
Well, that's what we want to debate. Do you guys think that's reasonable, or do you think it's maybe there's more positive applications that might benefit the research industry?
I mean, speaking as a panel company that runs panels in 25 countries where we need to deal with different legal jurisdictions and different languages, I mean, for us, those tools, they bring just a great deal of increased efficiency because we use it, for example, to facilitate translations, especially for legal, and they have been there for quite some time now. We are now also experimenting with using them for our user support to produce faster and better results and experiences for panel members. And where I totally agree with you is like a big challenge will be, I mean, if a chatbot can generate a questionnaire, it can also fill out the questionnaire. And the better the chatbot, the better the fake, and it will take some effort to recognize those fakes.
That's certainly a fair point. Any thoughts on this, Emmanuel, or I'll pass to the next question?
Yeah, reflecting on what we heard, I mean, I'm kind of in between. There is obviously a lot of buzz about artificial intelligence, and people throw it like a buzzword, right? If I may, Frank, it's kind of like teenage sex. Everyone talks about it, but nobody does anything.
Let me give some hope, right? If we look at the openness of how you use tech, GPS is a fantastic example, right? It wasn't until DARPA used it to then bomb everyone. However, we benefit from GPS every day. We use it in our phone. We use it for emergency services. And so we as an industry have to dictate how this tech gets used, how it gets exploited, right? And so the more realistic that we are of those vulnerabilities, the quicker we can respond and take control over it.
Okay,
Yes.
fair point.
No, I was going to add, yeah, my take on it is it will help us scale and automate things for sure. However, at the end of the day, the bot does what we tell it to do. And so I don't subscribe to that theory that everyone's going to be out of a job and questionnaires are going to be automatically generated by a bot and all that. Again, we're instructing the machine to do whatever we want it to do.
Well, I think the one interesting stat is I think something like 25% internet traffic at the moment is machine to machine or something like that. Yeah. And in a few years, it's going to be more than half of the internet traffic is actually going to be machines talking to machines, which is kind of freaky in a way. But yeah, it's a fair point that it is what we do with it is basically I think we're and I'm particularly enthusiastic about the potential, maybe a little bit longer down the path, maybe 10 years from now, but getting rid of surveys altogether for the most part and really having a conversation with a machine where the machine understands how you are and knows how to ask the right questions to pull information out of you and have a real dialogue rather than, again, a survey is only as good as the person that wrote it, and I suppose a conversation with a machine is only as good as, the thinking behind that machine, which, could be quite good if you treat it, you teach it about a category, the types of probing. It's clearer that you're going to get a lot more insights from the open ends if there's good probing. I think it's been proven, I've seen enough research to show that voice open ends are always much longer than typed open ends. And so, we're trying to get more in-depth insights at scale. We want to move more towards qual in some respects. I think there are qual aspects that can be brought in as a result of a better interface with machine learning type applications or NLP type applications. So anyway, so anybody have any thoughts on voice as an input method? I mean, are we going to be typing into closed-end surveys for the rest of our lives, or is there a different future potential?
I think some people, yes, others no. So I don't see voice as something that's new. It's just an additional input channel. Like some people will like it, others won't.
So the scummiest of marketers today will take a video of Obama, video of Joe Rogan, these faces that have countless hours of footage recorded about them. That allows them to do very, very sophisticated deepfakes. In addition to that, public figures, Obama, Rogan, whatever, they have countless hours of audio. And so you can run a deepfake of Joe Rogan saying, hey, go onto Amazon, search this product, download it. This gives me perfect abs, right? And then that is some new form of SEO TikTok marketing to then get people tricked into buying a product. And so if we step back of put on our gray hats here and think about how it'll be exploited, is a lot of research companies may move to voice thinking that it provides a layer of security. If I'm going to have a phone call with someone for 45 minutes, they're going to be real, right? But we know how to do all of these audio simulations of voices. And so it's going to be so funny. We're going to have potentially English as a second language person trying to interview a ChatGPT feed, put it into a voice generator to then capture this huge CPI, because these research companies are going to have their shields down thinking that voice is this mechanism to get perfect quality, right? And there's a 20-year-old, an 18-year-old who can do that right now, right, on Discord. And like that's going to get sold on all of these Telegram channels. That's going to get sold on all of these back-end networks to be able to basically automate completes with voice interviews, right? And so particularly when you have demonstrated that you can trick people with these public figures, to be able to have a respondent who doesn't have vocal or face recognition, you can come up with any form of a voice, right? It doesn't even have to resemble like your father's voice or your mother's voice or somebody whose voice you might remember. And so I tend to think that voice is just going to get automated as well, because there's plenty of startups, there's plenty of companies that are already doing this, right? Look at any voiceover work. Those companies are getting destroyed by AI voice generators.
Okay, you popped another balloon, but I love it. Well, here's my chance to be a little bit pessimistic on a different subject. Moving on to the last discussion about sort of big data and data marts. I mean, all of you companies get your clean rooms, get all your privacy consent systems in order, and even then, I'm still concerned that with the pace at which privacy legislation is advancing across the world and the complexity of it, that we'll never be able to catch up, and that we'll still be stuck with with gigantic terabytes of data in a BigQuery database that we can't do much with because we don't have the right forms of consent or the right ways to process it. I don't think capturing it's not a problem, processing not a problem, but privacy has the potential to derail, almost to push us backwards instead of forwards. And I'm just wondering if you guys have had similar experiences on that.
I mean, maybe since I come from Europe, I see something to privacy.
Yeah, the nexus of the problem.
So personally, I don't think that privacy is the issue here, and let me give you one or two examples. So I assume that every one of you is probably a member of at least one loyalty program or like any multi-brand loyalty program, and what those programs are designed to do is to capture data, exchange data between companies, and then use that data for insights or for marketing, and that's all legally clean because you consent to it as a user. And of course, in terms of technology, it's also possible. Or another example would be what has been done in Europe by the IAB Europe. When GDPR was launched, they have started this TCF. TCF stands for sorry, I forgot, but what does it stand for? It doesn't matter, I'll Google it later. But the idea basically is that if you are an ad tech vendor, then and you want to have your tags on publishers' websites, you need to consent to this framework, and you need to tell them what kind of data you are collecting, where you're storing it, where you're hosting it. And the publisher on the other side gets its users to consent to it. And as a TCF vendor ourselves, I can say that this works. So also in an environment that is heavily regulated. So it is actually not the privacy that is the issue, in my opinion. It's actually, if data is staying in silos, then it's the intent of the companies that are controlling that silo. So if Google could give out its data, it does not. I mean, I still remember the time when we were allowed to put a tracking tag into YouTube. And in terms of privacy, I do not understand why this is possible with a local publisher, but not with YouTube. It's Google's choice and not a privacy issue.
So TCF is in what, 5 or 10 countries?
It's across Europe.
Across Europe, okay. Yeah, so what we need is global privacy, but of course that's probably a long way off if it ever happens. But that would solve a lot of problems, because I think if we had like VHS versus Betamax. This is going back to dating myself again. But some kind of standard to adhere to, we could probably make it all work, right?
Yeah. I think the good thing is, I think us as a society, whenever there is a big pain, and I'd say privacy is a huge pain for a lot of companies, we build tools and products to help solve that pain pretty quickly. Okay. And I think the last few years, not to be an advertisement for some of these companies, but companies like Vanta have made the privacy compliance process a lot easier, and keeping that process just in an automated fashion, like built into your cloud ecosystem. They make that pretty seamless. So that's a tool that we use. Maybe if other folks kind of look into that, and they make the auditing process pretty easy. I think the three big things also we try to keep in mind at all points when we're working with customer data is right to know, right to delete, and right to opt out. If you keep those three things, those are kind of the big three. I like this, the CCPA, big three kind of in mind. You're in a pretty good place at least.
Yeah, I do want to point out that I don't know if anybody here has hired outside counsel to review market research specific legalities, but it is the Wild West. And our counsel that has reviewed everything, who has had no involvement here, is shocked. And one of the most blaring parts of right to delete is that I think all of the companies, all of the marketplaces, all of the survey exchanges have yet to implement an API to be able to delete respondent data. And so we as a brokerage firm have to process right to delete. We stay as compliant as possible, except all of our third parties have refused to implement an automated means to do that. And so from what I can tell, we might be concerned about it, we might be talking about it, but it's very simple. If you are a marketplace, have an API that takes a respondent identifier, and when I delete to it, clear out that person's data, right? That is the actionable to comply with California, with a lot of these laws that will continue to come out into place. This is a snowball that is rolling and it's not going to stop. And so there are very simple technical solutions to these legal matters that I haven't seen any action taken on.
I think we can bring the user or the consumer perspective to this. So I won't talk about the legal environment and not necessarily about the technology, but what we see in focus groups that we run on behalf of big tech brands is users are increasingly aware of what privacy, security is about, and are aware of how do tech firms, and frankly by extension panels in market research, collect, disseminate, and monetize their data. And the bright spot, what we see is people are okay with their data being monetized as long as there is a form of transparency and some education and a sense of data sovereignty. Where is my data? Where is my data stored? Interestingly, what we saw in those groups is some of those words like the cloud or data privacy, or another one is the algorithm. It feels like another power for people that feels intimidating and threatening. And I feel what Apple did really, really well in its last campaign to say Apple period, that's, privacy period, that's iPhone period, is to take ownership and to make tangible this notion of privacy. While I'm aware here we're at SampleCon to talk about data collection, the fact is that what the big tech brands do ultimately educate and therefore influence how users react to our surveys, I think.
Very good. Yeah, I do agree. Apple sort of made sense of it and marketed it in a good way. Let's move on to another pain point, which is in the technology trends. Do we see a silver bullet on the identity resolution issue? I mean, I don't want to get into fraud because that's covered extensively tomorrow and already, but certainly identity resolution is a constant problem for a range of different applications. Certainly in your business, I'm sure, you got to make sure who you're talking to is who, so validation of people being who they are. I know there's technology in the horizon, passkey, for example, which might have some potential, or there's probably some other good solutions as well that maybe some of you would like to talk about. You want to start, Jake?
Sure. Yeah, I could just say a couple quick things that we've kind of thought about. A big thing for us is mapping each respondent, especially on the B2B side, to a trusted entity. So for us, that's usually LinkedIn. Does this individual that we're trying to send a study invitation to have a LinkedIn? Has it existed for several years? And do they have an N number of followers or connections that seems legitimate? So that's one way we look at trusted entities. The other is where we're actually delivering. So if I'm delivering to John Smith, I have maybe 100 attributes about this individual. I have his LinkedIn profile, and I have his corporate domain, johnsmith@amazon.com. No one in this room can just have an amazon.com corporate domain. So that's another trusted entity. So the first line of interaction with that individual, trying to do that through a corporate domain. I think probably the holy grail is credentialing against one of those trusted entities. So if you could take that same John Smith, have him OAuth against LinkedIn, and I get passed back data from LinkedIn saying, hey, this is him, this is his actual profile. That's probably the holy grail in terms of in my opinion at least, but that friction is something that we'd have to bake into cost.
I mean, so the US is one of the only countries in the world where you can get a phone number without a passport. And it's well known that there are certain communication channels that inherently provide these forms of validation baked in. And I just spent a few weeks in Africa working with potential suppliers, and they're entirely based off phone number. Payments are integrated in their phone, taxes are integrated with their phone number. Now, surveys are going to be integrated with their phone number, right? And so we might be concerned about it here in the US, but it's an opportunity because through certain communication channels, it alleviates a lot of KYC work that has already been pioneered by either other industries or other governments.
Klaus, you've had some interesting solutions in your markets that as well.
I mean, since we are only operating in Europe, there are across the whole of Europe some e-governmental initiatives, and they also led to national authentication methods. So, as an Austrian citizen, for example, I can have an app with which I can do all my e-government things, from taxes to changing my residency and so on. And what we're doing is we're implementing those IDs, connecting it to our panel so that we can authenticate people and actually can verify them. And I think the good thing is that all those national solutions over the next couple of years will transform into one EU-wide solution that can be used at least across the whole of Europe. And I think that's a good thing.
That'd be tremendous. I don't think we'll ever see a national ID in this country. A lot of people just don't like the idea, for good reason, I guess. But it's good to know that Europe will have that solution, because if everybody has an ID in the country and you can get it, then you can't have two people with the same ID. So let's change gears a little bit. The world in which we live in is changing kind of fairly significantly from the way that brands present themselves and so forth. And as I said, Emmanuel wrote a really interesting book on this topic. I was hoping you could maybe just give a couple of minutes on the key concepts of assemblages and the relevance for this audience, which is, in the sense of how society is changing and brands are changing, and likely how we go about doing our research might need to evolve to work in that environment.
Yeah, so a couple of shifts that seem interesting is, I feel the first one is brands are co-constructed with the audience. If we go back 5-7 years, as brand managers, we could dictate to the audience what the brand should stand for. And today, people managing brands and building brands have to not only accept that it's an exercise of co-creation, but in fact, they have to let go of some control to facilitate this exercise of co-creation. And we see brands being successful doing this, like Vaseline in the US, for example, is going through a renaissance since TikTokers harness the brand using Vaseline for their PM routine, beauty routine. The second one is to keep in mind that brands are dynamic and not static. In other words, we can establish the foundation, the big idea for the brand and what it should stand for. We, as brand managers, marketing professionals, however, have to accept that this is going to evolve. And again, as a co-creation, intentional exercise with the audience. Maybe I could clarify what I mean by intention versus expectations. So we often speak in our industry of managing people's expectations, managing customers' expectations, which is fine. The expectations is I expect the product to do the trick and to be reliable and to be cheap and to be fast, to perform its functional benefit. Expectations is kind of do me, if you will, whereby in contrast, co-creation, intentions, being intentional is this process of co-creating. So the last big major trend I see is with so many brands and so many products to choose from, people expect more for brands, and that is brands can no longer just sell products, but they must also make a positive impact on people as individuals and the world they live in. And demonstrate this impact, that is not just claim a purpose, but demonstrate that they can do it.
All right, very interesting. Definitely, the definition of an ad campaign or a brand campaign is quite different from, my days. Again, thinking back in the 80s, I was a product manager for Irish Spring Soap, Sean and whatever. Anyway, in those days, our media campaign was, you talk to we got some network, we got a little bit of spot, you pick which, you choose which show you want to be on, get a certain amount of GRPs, boom, not much to it really. It was something I did 5% of my time. I spent most of my time on worrying about inventory and stuff, and packaging and whatever. Nowadays, to be relevant for brand consumers, it sounds like you have to have social influences. You have to have, TikTok videos. I don't know. You have to have you have to figure out I don't know what your media strategy is in a world with streaming media and Netflix and thousands of choices of where to advertise. Does this media fragmentation and I don't know, these new types of marketing strategies become almost such that you can't really measure them anymore. You can't measure the effectiveness of them other than just on sales, because individually, the old adage that, half of my advertising works, but just don't know which half. I think that's even more true today because, for a while there was the promise of where we're heading with the internet and the promise of going from mass marketing to one-to-one, and it just kind of seems to be falling flat because all of the Meta and all these big platforms don't allow disaggregate level exposure data out. They don't allow the information necessary to really effectively evaluate cross-media effectiveness. So I guess the question is, are we heading forward? Are there still techniques that we could employ that are going to give us good brand lift measurements in the future? Or is media evaluation something that is as elusive as ever and we don't see a solution?
Well, I think we should just back up to say, you don't need a tinfoil hat to realize that ByteDance already has better metrics of all of your consumers than you do, right? When you run a campaign on TikTok, they know the sentiment of your facial expressions when you're watching that TikTok video. And so, it's crazy to me to have a market research company try to do market research on a much better, much bigger, Trojan horse of a research company, right? And I think we're kidding ourselves if you try to imagine that, ByteDance, TikTok, they have teams of people already doing this, right? And there's a reason why there's a bill to have it banned, right? You don't need to be a conspiracy theorist.
Yeah, well, I mean, they're going to tell you that your advertising works great.
Of course, because then you're going to spend more money, right?
Yeah, but I've got 50 different places to spend my money, and I don't know which one to give it to. And just the ones that tell me it's great, or the ones that actually have. I need a cross-platform media assessment. I think.
I think it's not necessarily just about market research. It's about trust because Facebook can tell you they displayed 50 million views. But they might just have delivered 5 million. And if you can't measure that, there's no way, you need to believe Facebook. And that's a trust issue. And I think as a research industry as a whole, the lack of being able to track those campaigns, I think for the whole industry is a big issue because a lot of the money that is generated in this industry is tied up to brand measurement or campaign measurement. And by now, I mean, the really measurable share of the ad spend is maybe, I don't know, depending on the country, 20 to 40%. And I think if we as an industry don't find a way how to access this data, we will become irrelevant because we have no USP anymore to the client. Why should the client book us if we can't measure?
That's my concern, indeed. Emmanuel, you talk with brand managers regularly. What are they thinking these days about how their campaigns are, how they spend their money and manage the brands?
Yeah, I see three opportunities. One is to measure the input. So again, what is the big idea? And before we even get into media measurement is how does my brand, how does my product benefit my audience? We're going back to the book Assemblage, that is, I, the consumer, I'm the hero, and the brand should take me from who I am to who I want to become, right? So that's the core concept of a big idea in advertising that hasn't changed since Ogilvy and is even more so relevant now than it was before. Then there's the output of the campaign. Am I moving the needle on sales? That's super easy to measure. Am I moving the needle on brand perception, on the upper funnel brand metrics? And in the middle, I see an opportunity to measure specific tactics in isolation, although that measurement is not perfect. A true cross-platform measurement, as compelling as it sounds, for the reasons you mentioned before, it sounds very difficult to execute because of the walled gardens, because the complexity of media plans, and because of the overlap and the sequencing also. In other words, someone exposed on YouTube and then TikTok, well, that's not the same thing as someone who is exposed on TikTok and then YouTube, right? So getting into the details of the actual impact of the campaign in the middle, frankly, I don't think it's very feasible. I think there's an opportunity to get a good enough big picture of the performance of a campaign, to fine-tune the strategy towards specific publishers and creative executions. However, it's becoming harder, if not impossible, to capture a reliable, detailed, granular, cross-platform understanding of a campaign. That's
my sense. All right, I got a couple more questions I wanted to get to, Max and Jake. Jake, first, tell me about, I'm intrigued by this real-time. I've always loved the idea of real-time research. and I've struggled with B2B, for decades in terms of, challenges of finding these audiences is very, very difficult. But you seem to have figured out a way to not only find them, but to find them in real time with, I assume, high quality, because that's the most important factor in that industry, in that segment of the industry.
Yeah, so for us, we're taking a playbook out of the ad tech space and using third-party data to recruit. So for instance, our engine sits on top of 800 million professional and firmographic records, and we source kind of programmatically and ad hoc off of that. We can recruit off things like job title, location, management level, et cetera. I think the big key, and maybe why this breaks down for some folks, is they might say that, or folks might say they use third-party data to recruit folks, but they don't own that data. So I think a lot of times people will say, we use third-party data, but that means I have a Zoom Info license or something like that. And unless you fully own that third-party data, it sits in your ecosystem, you're not able to do things like build models on top of it, interweave other data, like has this individual participated before, interweave behavioral data, define your own access patterns and search patterns, going back to some of the OpenAI stuff that I mentioned before. Like, you're just beholden to the data provider. So I think that's a key point there, and that's kind of how we think about it.
Do you think that'll eventually make its way into the consumer research side of things?
I see no reason why it can't. I think I haven't thought as much about the verification side of things on that side, but it definitely seems to me like it could. It's kind of the same general process, in my opinion.
Very interesting. Max, I just wanted to, you had earlier discussion, you mentioned you had some ideas on ways to make things a bit more efficient, relative to connecting systems.
Just one? No.
Yeah, well, give us a few minutes of your thoughts. I think a lot of people love to hear that. You've got some great ideas.
To reference the conversation, I had mentioned how a few years ago, the whole discussion of SampleCon was around APIs. APIs are going to change the industry, will allow everything to be programmatic. But what has kind of come out of that is APIs have led to a lot of very poor respondent experiences because suppliers are dependent on API-provided stats. And it hasn't been until, I guess, over a year ago, about within the last year or so, that an exchange has started to expose a stream and feed of all marketplace activity. And so when we are dependent on a marketplace or an exchange to tell us information about a survey and how many people have gone into it and all of that, it's garbage. We can't trust it. We can't use it in data models. And so what we're starting to see is that as marketplaces want to compete against each other to give better conversions to their suppliers, better experiences, is that the APIs simply serve a role to expose information about a survey's eligibility. Is it live? How much is it going to pay out? Anything about its performance or its activity, don't even bother. Just expose an activity stream of every single entrance that goes in, every single return, and its respective outcome. You do not have to expose the supplier that gave it. You don't have to expose anything about the respondent. But what that allows us to do, and what we've noticed a huge shift in the programmatic space, is that let's say you have a survey that's been live for, I don't know, a few hours. It has a couple thousand completes, and then it gets broke. Something happens, no one starts to get returned from it. The conversion has a steady decline because that denominator has been so big. And so it takes potentially a few hours for that conversion to come down for a supplier to say, you know what, we're not going to send anyone in anymore. And what we've seen, and that's what this activity stream allows, is that when you just expose to suppliers every single entrance and return, we might be able to have a real-time longitudinal model of like what the conversion is, and then all of a sudden, it stops, right? Nobody starts to come back. And so rather than taking hours to stop sending people in, we can do it right away. And it is a slight redefinition of the role of APIs and the role of streaming events in our industry. And I bring this up at all of our talks, but if we want to mirror other commodity markets, because we are a commodity market of human attention, that's all we are, is you look at CME Group, you look at these other exchanges, and you can get a feed of all of the activity. And so we don't need to reinvent the wheel. I'm not proposing that we reinvent the wheel. I'm just proposing that we adhere to the models that other bigger companies have done for longer and have done for better, right? And so that's one of the things we had discussed.
Well, I think one should be of interest to many of you. I mean, obviously, we've all run hard and fast to get into the API business and to be able to expose the right data. But what you're suggesting, yeah, and everybody sort of knows that, that there is that downward sloping curve as you get towards the end of the project.
I'm suggesting we can be lazy. Don't calculate it for us. Yeah. Let us, as suppliers, suppliers are becoming more and more sophisticated, bigger and bigger, data science teams. It's their responsibility, right? And so I'm trying to help all of the marketplaces and brands here.
No, this is one of those things where if we had a standard, of how to send the data, because otherwise we're going to have 5 different companies, each have their own way of
in 2 years we're going to have 5
data.
Different streams, right? That we're going to
and
parse.
we'll be no further ahead. Just maybe a little bit further ahead, but it'll put a lot of work to get there.
Yeah.
But, so that's my concern. But I endorse the concept. Yeah. I just think we need to. The only way to really implement it is to form an industry group that says these are the standards we want for API and for integrations and for programmatic, what data to expose, and that would yield optimal efficiency. It's a simple enough thing. We integrate with a lot of vendors, and in many cases we're integrating it differently in each one. That's certainly not.
That's our job. Yeah.
That's the reality. All right, we're down to only about 30 seconds, so I think it's time we perhaps ask some questions. From the audience. Covered a lot of ground. So any of the topics we discussed is certainly open.
One over there.
Okay, and please go to a microphone if you could.
Got one in the back, middle left.
Yeah.
Hi, I actually wanted to go back to a comment you made at the very beginning about, I think you were talking about vector search for navigating unstructured data. Was that kind of what you were talking about, like similarity distance, cosine distance between vector representations, that sort of thing?
Yeah, pretty much.
Okay, cool. That's all I had.
Cool.
Let him shine.
That was an easy one.
All right. So when this is out, we're done. Yeah, so we got 29 seconds. It'll take us that long to walk off stage. Thanks very much. I think it was a very interesting conversation.